You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 30th of December 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello there and a very warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, did Netanyahu triumph with Trump? We'll look at the key takeaways from yesterday's Mar-a-Lago meeting. Also ahead in the next 30 minutes, the latest business news from Bloomberg's Ewan Potts, and
people are catching on that the algorithms aren't feeding you the actual content you want. They have something else at play, and that's feeding their own content towards you.
The New York store providing us with a welcome return to DVDs and Blu-ray. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Now, far from an impatient president keen to seal the next Nobel Peace Prize with peace in Gaza, Donald Trump seemed yesterday to give the green light to continued military campaigns by Israel under the stewardship of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, Yossi Meckelberg is Senior Consultant Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House, and I'm delighted to say joins me in the studio. Good afternoon, Yossi.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you. Right, so this was at a meeting in Mar-a-Lago yesterday in Florida, and the stage had been set for perhaps a tetchy meeting where Donald Trump would be running out of patience with Netanyahu. And there was much speculation about the fact that these two men didn't get on very well, but needed each other. The results, however, seem to be absolutely contradicting that impression.
Absolutely right. And then you ask yourself, is it Trump's tactic to do with Netanyahu? Kind of a bear hug, give him all the love, talking about pardon, and actually already almost declared that Netanyahu is going to be pardoned, and despite denial that he actually, or by the Israeli President Herzog, that actually talked to him about supporting on Hamas, attacking Iran, all of this, saying that he's not happy with him about the West Bank, which we can expand about this too. So whether it's tactic or, as we know with Trump, it depends on the day. It depends on his mood. So on the one hand, he allegedly complained just a few hours earlier that he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. So Israel rewarded him with the Israeli prize almost instantly, and declared the first non-Israeli to get it. And at the same time, what he says, now you try to make a sorted from this, and said, is he going to push for phase 2 or it is not? Is it actually talks about Israel remaining in more than 50% of Gaza until Hamas disarming? What does it exactly mean? And then say if they don't, hell will break loose or something along these lines, and there are countries already prepared to do that. And then comes the Iran, and you don't know, is he talking about the build-up of missile project, or improving missiles capability, or are we talking about the redeveloping or continuing with the nuclear? So it's difficult to answer exactly what he says.
So let's go through piece by piece some of the points that were made, because there was an awful lot covered in the short space of time. There was Hamas. Trump says that unnamed countries want to go in and wipe out Hamas if the militant group fails to disarm. We have that. You mentioned that support for new Israeli strikes on Iran, and also we have the West Bank and, of course, the pardon. So these are all huge, huge items. So let's go through it one by one. The Gaza issue, the second part of the peace plan, is arguably an incredibly difficult problem to solve. Yet Trump said unnamed countries want to go in and wipe out Hamas. Where were we at the end of yesterday when it came to the US and, dare I say it, joint Israeli position on Gaza?
I don't know any other country but Israel that is ready to resume the war in Gaza. So maybe he has a list that we don't know yet. I doubt it. But I think it's again a way of threatening Hamas. Now, there are two things here. Probably reducing the influence of Hamas in the Palestinian political arena, will be a positive thing. But without actually empowering someone else that can take over to see that the PA, the reform, first the government of technocrats, ensuring that there is the international stabilization force that ensure that the ceasefire is more stable, and seeing Israel withdrawing eventually to the pre-7th of October border, it's hard to see how any progress is going to be made. So this should be the next phase. With Hamas and disarmament, Hamas by disarmament, and not that it shouldn't, basically declare itself almost irrelevant. So it must be find a formula, probably closer to what happened in Northern Ireland, that they are not armed or not armed in a way that can either threaten Israel or their own people in order to move forward in Palestinian political arena. But to do it by threatening with another war, this defies what Trump himself tried to achieve.
Okay, so let's move on to the Iran issue. Israel wants to mount fresh strikes on Iran over its missile program. What are the deeper and longer term risks when it comes to Israel mounting such action?
I think this is probably the most dangerous arena right now, because we saw also the president of Iran said, everyone is against us. He had just a statement about, the EU, the US, Israel, are basically staffing us, and we are prepared for that. Israel entered already an election year, which is going to be very problematic. So one of the moves that Netanyahu can do to improve his position in public opinion polls is an attack on Iran, because he thinks that Iran is in a weaker position. The question again, what Trump exactly mean if they continue development of their missile capability or develop their nuclear project? And the question then, whether the United States will join or not. In my mind, the most important thing is actually to go and try to find a new JCPOA, a better one, in order to defuse the situation. The Middle East doesn't need another war.
Okay, let's move on to the West Bank. Trump conceding, he said, I wouldn't say we agree on the West Bank 100%, but we'll come to a conclusion on it. At first glance, that sounds as if that was a very ill-informed comment.
Yeah, I hope he doesn't agree of 10%, let alone close to 100%, because what we see is a annexation of the West Bank by Israel. Settler violence or settler terrorism is on the rise. Confiscation of land is on the rise. The oppression of Palestinian people in the West Bank is worse than ever. But this time we don't say those are groups or movement outside government. This is the heart of the government. Those are ministers in charge, whether it's people like Smotrich, or Ben Gvir, or Strock. They are coordinating this with the military. They're coordinated with, they're part of the government to basically creating a situation that a Palestinian state, a viable Palestinian state will never happen. This is the trajectory. So Trump shouldn't agree about anything the way that Israel behaves right now in the Middle East. In the West Bank, Only last week they approved another 19 settlements in the West Bank. Before that, they approved the E1, building of E1 that separate between Jerusalem and the West Bank. Just look at the map and you see exactly what this government is trying to do.
Finally, Yossi, you sat in that chair so many times over the last few years, and every time we speak, there is often very little to be hopeful about. Is there any glimmer somewhere for 2026?
First of all, the fact that we keep talking about it, and it's still in the news and it's not neglected, it's important. Where is the glimmer? If Trump will continue, together with the European countries that many of them recognize Palestinian state last year, we continue to focus what's happening there and go through the 20 points of the Trump plan all the way to a two-state solution. Maybe there is hope too.
Yossi Makovec, thank you as ever for joining in the studio. You're listening to Monocle Radio. This is Emma Nelson here bringing you the briefing. The time here in London is 9 minutes past midday. A look now at some of the day's other news headlines. Here's Monica Lillis.
Thanks, Emma. Iran's president has urged his government to listen to protesters' legitimate demands and pledged to protect livelihoods after 2 days of demonstrations in Tehran over the collapsing currency and worsening economic conditions. The protests come as the Iranian rial hits record lows against the US dollar amid mounting sanctions pressure from the US and its allies and growing fears of renewed conflict with Israel. Saudi Arabia has bombed the Yemeni port city of Monocle after a weapons shipment from the UAE arrived for separatist forces, warning that Emirati actions were extremely dangerous. The strike follows rising tensions over the advance of the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council, raising fears the confrontation could open a new front in Yemen's long-running war. And Nepal is set to scrap its long-standing waste deposit scheme for Mount Everest climbers after officials said it failed to curb rubbish and was difficult to enforce at high altitude. The refundable €3,400 deposit will be replaced by a non-refundable clean-up fee, pending parliamentary approval. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Monica. You're back with the briefing. Now let's get the latest business news. Now Ewan Potts joins me from Bloomberg. Good afternoon, Ewan. Happy New Year when it comes.
Hello, Emma, and to you.
Thank you. Right. Well, let's start off. If you've been investing in gold and silver this year, you've had a good year. You've also had a good year if you've invested in platinum.
Yeah, it's been fantastic for precious metals. Gold and silver actually remain on track for their best annual performance since 1979. Gold is up a stunning 65%, and silver has just gone crazy, up more than 150% year to date. They've been supported by strong purchases by central banks, speculative inflows by investors, and 3 successive interest rate cuts by the US Federal Reserve. So key things driving precious metals. But making a late in the year grab on investors' attention is something perhaps a bit more unexpected, and that is copper. Now, copper is heading for its longest winning run since 2017. The metal is used in loads of industrial processes, but particularly for electrical uses, and is often seen as a play on the global economy. When the global economy is doing well, particularly when China is doing well, there is demand for loads and loads of copper. Well, the global economy is not doing that well at the moment. It's kind of ticking along okay, you might say. But this is actually a supply story. Supply issues have really dominated metals this year. Copper mines from Indonesia and Chile to the DRC have suffered accidents, and that's really crimped supply. And for copper, it's also the threat of US import tariffs. That is another key driver pushing copper higher. Traders have been shipping big volumes into American ports to get ahead of levies. That's something that Donald Trump has threatened on numerous occasions. So an interesting rise in copper as we get towards the end of 2025.
And it's a very traditional reason behind it. It's the fact that the demand for copper is expected to outstrip supply within 5 years.
Yeah, it's the same thing that always drives prices higher. It is that demand-supply balance, as you say. But it's interesting that it's not really coming from demand. Demand is relatively strong in certain sectors. And of course, we're seeing a lot of electrification uses for copper. And we know that's a big multi-year story with electric vehicles and heat pumps, particularly in Europe, really growing in popularity. And that is driving demand for copper. And there's a lot of demand for fixing our electrical systems. A lot of our grids in Europe have been built decades and decades ago, and they're just being renewed now as demand for electricity rises, along with all those data centers. So there is a demand story, but the supply is really crimped as well. So that is pushing prices higher.
Let's talk about demand and supply for another vital component of life in 2025, which is one of those nightmarish plastic dolls with the weird eyes, the Labubu. Its maker, Pop Mart, is going to try and expand its global presence next year. It'll be opening a store on Fifth Avenue in New York. But questions are being asked as to whether it's a little bit too late.
Yeah, Pop Mart International Group shares sliding today. It's the maker of the Labubu toy. The sell-off follows reports that some scalpers have been pausing buying Labubus after price swings in China's secondary market suggests that there's some weakening appetite for the rather odd-looking furry creations. The company's already contending with weak Black Friday sales in the US, and it's starting to fuel comparisons to the 1990s Beanie Babies bust, if you remember that. Annual revenue growth has halved in the latest quarter from more than 800% to a mere 420%. Now, that's the kind of number that most companies can only dream of, but it's definitely moving in the wrong direction. As you say, Pop Mart has been expanding enormously. They've been moving into the entertainment world, opening a 40,000 square meter Popland theme park in Beijing, and reportedly striking a deal with Sony Pictures to potentially develop a Labubu movie. But the core concern is whether the sharp-fanged creature is a durable long-term character or a fashion trend whose shelf life is already expiring. Emma, I can declare no vested interest here. I own no Labubus, and I have to say I have zero interest in buying one.
And when it comes to the Beanie Babies bust, I literally think of little else. Ewan Potts, thank you so much for joining us and wishing you a very happy new year. You're listening to The Briefing. Now, while streaming platforms have dominated the way most of us enjoy films nowadays, physical media is making a surprising and welcome comeback, with DVD and Blu-ray sales rising through 2025. Well, that renewed interest helped to inspire the opening of the Night Owl Video, a new shop in Brooklyn, offering a wide range of physical releases for those looking beyond online. Monocle's Hassan Anderson heard from the store's co-founders, Jess Mills and Aaron Hamill, to find out more, and he began by asking them how the idea for the store first came about.
Aaron and I met about 12 years ago working for an independent film company called Troma Entertainment. And since then, we've remained very good friends who love independent film. And we have been talking about the fact that New York City has really been lacking in a space that actually sells physical media, a place that you can go and buy DVDs and VHS and everything that we sell. And we were really shocked that that market hadn't been hit. So last year, we were kind of had a few beers at the pub and kind of said, let's do it. No one else is doing it. And, smash cut to 5 months later, we'd opened the doors in April this year to an amazing fanfare. We had about 750 people come to our soft launch.
That's amazing. So what was the approach you took to curating the selection of films you have in store?
Well, I think the idea from the beginning was to have it be a place that anybody who liked movies could come and find something that they would like. We definitely didn't want to pigeonhole it into one genre or one type of movie. I mean, definitely the idea was to have all decades represented, all genres represented, so that people could find something. It was especially important about in terms of decades, because I think that's a big problem with streaming, is that in terms of catalog content, it has gotten nearly impossible especially on the major streaming platforms, to find movies that were made before 1975. So getting those kinds of movies available to the public was also important for me as somebody who, loves those kinds of movies.
One of the things Night Owl is explicitly reacting against is the streaming model, which dominates how we watch film today. Your shop's motto is death to streamers. What do you think are some of the benefits of choosing physical film over online platforms?
Streamers feed you these algorithm titles, which means they are pushing their own content towards you. But it's lovely to see in the store, you come into the store and you'll see a customer pick up a title and another customer will lean over and say, hey, do you know this film? Here's some bits and pieces about it. You should check it out. And from that human interaction, film lovers are finding content that they would never have normally been, fed to through these algorithms. I think people are catching on that the algorithms aren't feeding you the actual content you want. They have something else at play, and that's feeding their own content towards you, not a broad variety.
I think people are frustrated by the streaming platforms, and I certainly am as a consumer. And look, I have some, I think there are some smaller streamers, for instance, the Criterion Channel based here in New York, I think does amazing work at putting out really interesting movies. But I think the major streamers, the Silicon Valley set, they've taken something that was once extremely convenient and gave you a large variety of choice and have turned it into something that's the complete opposite. I mean, how many times have I been on a streaming platform and been frustrated with the deluge of choice? It's too much choice in a way. You just end up scrolling for 30 minutes until you find something, or you just get frustrated and give up. Whereas with my Blu-ray collection, it's much more curated. I have the films that I love, or, maybe I'll take a flyer on something just based on the cover at a store like Night Owl.
So this renewed love for physical media, do you see it growing further? And is there a customer base for it beyond those who are just nostalgic for the era of DVDs and Blu-ray?
physical media for movies is very similar to where vinyl was 10 years ago. And so we did, do our market research, and we saw that there are a lot of these boutique labels, collectors that are really, really growing in numbers. But I think in terms of customers coming in, we've been really surprised about the broad range of customers, particularly with Gen Z customers, who there is a perception that they watch everything on their phone and they don't care about physical stuff. And there's a real, bad perception of how they're enjoying content and how much they value film. And so a lot of our customers have actually been, people starting their movie collections. They're film fans that are young, that are, getting frustrated by streaming service, not being able to afford, as a college student, to have the 10 different streaming platforms that you would need to have a decent catalog, and coming in and actually buying, our $5, $10 used discs so they can start their own collection and know that they have it available. And that just continues to be quite shocking to us, because that is a market that we weren't predicting, and we're thrilled to see, because, it's the next generation keeping film alive. We love to see it.
Jess Mills and Aaron Hamill from the Night Owl video store in Brooklyn. They're talking to Monocle's Hassan Anderson. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest thanks to all my guests and to the producer, Anita Riotta and Hassan Anderson. Our studio manager is Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing's back tomorrow at the same time for the final time in 2025. Hope you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.